Let's take a look at the Jenkins learning repo for the given project. Now, once you're on my GitHub, you can come to repositories and we'll be looking at the Jenkins Terraform repo. So if you do not have this repository on your first search, you could type here Jenkins Terraform learning repo, or you could just type Jenkins Terraform. You will see the Jenkins Terraform infra repo. This is the repo which we are going to be using for this given project. Now, for this repository, you click here to take you to the Jenkins learning infra repo, and this is a repo which we'll be using for this project. Now, once you're on this repository, this is just a basic Jenkins Terraform info. I've given you in this particular repo a little bit of understanding of what Jenkins is, how Jenkins facilitates the development and operations processes through continuous integration, where we have Jenkins, which helps to build continuous delivery pipelines. And then we equally have every change which you do to your software is committed using a version control system like Git, and then the rest of the configurations you specify in a Jenkins file. Now, looking at this basic example, here's just a flow chart of how Jenkins work. The moment you push a code, it's committed to source code management. So you do an SCM commit using GitHub. So you do git commit and git push. You're able now to push into a given repository. Now, once you push into this repository on a given branch, your workflow begins here, where you start by checking out the code. You do a git checkout, and then you can download the code from your GitHub repository into your Jenkins server. Once the code is downloaded into your Jenkins server, you can go ahead now to process all the respective stages as the pipeline might require. You can have a stage to build and launch your code. You might have a stage to test your code. You might have a stage to deploy your code, and probably even the end of the workflow. Maybe you want to integrate some form of notification to your pipeline. You can do that at the end of your code. So this is a basic lookout as to what a Jenkins infrastructure would be. Now, as far as Jenkins is concerned, we also have the Jenkins pipeline. So this is a basic Jenkins pipeline syntax. Jenkins is written in Groovy. So this is a Groovy pipeline syntax where you have the key configurations all specified within the pipeline, and then you have the respective stages, and in between these stages you have respective individual stage. In the stages you have individual stages. So you have a stage, you might have a stage to perform a build, you might have a stage to perform a test, and you might have a stage to perform a deploy. So these are the various stages which might be constituted within a given Jenkins pipeline. So basically you define the stage, and then within the stage you have the steps. Within the steps you have the commands which you want to execute in the given stage. Now you can get more information about a Jenkins pipeline and how to use a Jenkins file in this documentation. So if you open this documentation, it should take you to how to use a Jenkins file. This is the official Jenkins documentation. You can come to this documentation using a Jenkins file, creating a Jenkins file. This basic how to create a Jenkins file, how to perform a build, how to perform a test, how to perform a deploy. All this information you can get from the official Jenkins documentation. You can also check out the installation steps of Jenkins. You can check out details about pipelines, pipeline syntax, and all of this. You can get all of this once you come to the official Jenkins documentation. But we are going to move back to our given repository. So while we are in our repository, this is the configuration which we'll be doing in this given module. In this module, we'll be setting up an infrastructure pipeline for a company called WonderPrep. So we'll be doing WonderPrep Terraform infrastructure pipeline using Terraform, Slack, and Jenkins as a continuous integration technology. So this is a basic architecture of what we'll be doing. The developers will create some form of Terraform infrastructure code, push the code to the GitHub repository of the given project, and then we are going to integrate a webhook that will automatically pull the code from the GitHub into the Jenkins server. Now, once the code is brought into the Jenkins server, we are going to use we are going to implement the various Terraform commands, starting with the Terraform init, Terraform plan, Terraform apply, and Terraform destroy, of course, to delete the resources. So the basic infrastructure file which we will have will just be to write some Terraform code in our VS Code, push the code to a given repository, set up a GitHub webhook, and then get that code into a Jenkins server. Now we'll be using Chekhov, not Checkstyle. We'll be using Chekhov to perform code analysis on our Terraform configuration code. We'll be using checkoff to perform code analysis on our given code. And now the code basically that will be written in Terraform will be to deploy some form of resources in our production environment AWS account. And this production environment AWS account will have a prod server. So the Terraform code which we are writing is some basic Terraform code to provision a prod server, a web server, and an S3 bucket in some private subnet. So this is the basic configuration which you will do. You create a Terraform code using Terraform on your local. You push the code to GitHub repository, enable a GitHub webhook, build the code automatically with Jenkins, provision the code to your AWS environment using the necessary credentials, and then we'll also integrate Slack notifications to ensure that every step of the build process will be updated using Slack notifications. So use Slack notifications to update. Now this is a basic CI/CD infrastructural setup. First, you have to create a GitHub repository. We'll be creating a GitHub repository. You can fork this current repo, the Jenkins Terraform repo. This is the repo, Jenkins Terraform infra repo. So you want to begin by forking this repo. You fork this repo, and then you can give the repository the name WandaPrep Terraform infra repo. Once you fork the repository, give the name WandaPrep Terraform infra repo. We are going to be doing that in the next step. Now, the second thing is you have to create a Jenkins server. You create a Jenkins server using the Amazon Linux 2023 image. And then to create this Jenkins server, you're going to be making use of the Jenkins installation shell script, which will pass as user data. Now, to pass that user data, you come to the installation files in this repository. You click on these installation files and you see the Jenkins script. This is Jenkins installation script. This user data can be used to provision a Jenkins server. Now, coming back to our repository, once you provision the Jenkins server, we are also going to be integrating Slack in our pipeline. So you want to join this Slack workspace, and after joining the Slack workspace, you want to also access the WandaPrep infra team channel in Slack. And then now this also outlines the various step-by-step guide to creating the resources. First, you set up Jenkins, access Jenkins on the given public address. So you access your Jenkins server, and then you create your pipeline in the Jenkins server. You install the Terraform plugin, you set up the Terraform plugin, you install the necessary credentials, set up AWS necessary credentials using access key and secret access key, and then you also set up credentials for Slack to enable Slack integration with the Jenkins pipeline. And then you also have to configure the Slack pipeline, and at the end you set up a webhook. So this webhook will be used to automatically trigger such that every time code is pushed to the repository, we automatically have updates on how the code is actually pushed or the stages in the pipeline. So you want to use the webhook. So this stage will specify how to automatically create a webhook between the repository which you're working with and the given Jenkins server. So the webhook, once you set it up, the payload URL basically will contain the Jenkins server public IP and then this flag GitHub webhook to establish connectivity between your GitHub repository that contains the source code and the given Jenkins server. So on the server side, you need to also perform these configurations, configure Jenkins on the server side to pull every code on specific push events. So it means if you push certain code to the given repository, you also have to customize our Jenkins to check such that every time new code is pushed, that code is automatically sent to the Jenkins server. So you can also modify some lines in the code base in the main.terraform file to see how webhook works. Once you do those modifications, you push the modifications to your repository, you will definitely see how it automatically triggers the build on the new commit which has been made or on the new push that has been made to the repository. So this basic repo is a repository which we are going to be using to set up the Jenkins Terraform infrastructure for a given company. So you want to check out this repository as we will be referencing it in the next steps in this module. So let's go ahead to begin by creating our project infrastructure and the Jenkins server.